welcome to this edition of Startup Central. I'm Nayantara Rai. This is the only show of its kind on Indian television dedicated, of course, to startups, innovation, technology, disruption. Basically, if it falls under the aegis of the new economy, it's going to be here on your favorite channel, ET Now, every weekday at sharp 6 p.m. Like all the stakeholders of the community that we get on this show, ladies and gentlemen, we thrive on constructive criticism. So keep those emails coming in. Love getting your comments on Twitter as well. Our email address right on top, suc@etnow.tv. We laugh up on phrases, but we really appreciate his constructive feedback to take the show to the next level. India is the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. In 2020-2021, it was perhaps one of the most exuberant spots of the Indian economy, with record fundraising, record minting of unicorns as well. Startups that were building not just for India, but the world. 2022 is, of course, turning out to be a very challenging year. It's turning out to be a winter season, a season which is being defined by significant markdowns in valuations and large-scale layoffs. In the midst of all of this, we have a report by Hurun as well as Ask, where they're talking about what this ecosystem is going to look like, how many unicorns could be minted, and they also have some very interesting terminology called gazelles as well as cheetahs. Gazelles are what's going to take 2 years to mint into unicorns. Cheetahs need to run faster, so they'll take 4 years to be minted into unicorns. We've got spokespeople from both of them, Ask as well as Hurun, Mr. Junaid with us from Hurun and Mr. Saluja from Ask. Thank you so much for joining us here. Mr. Junaid, should I come to you first? A very interesting report. We'll get to the specifics in just a bit. But I find it fascinating that in the midst of all of this gloom and doom, where we're talking about, very overpriced valuations for startups, mass layoffs, people losing a lot of money, here are you folks that are coming out and saying, okay, these are the startups that you all need to look out for and need to bet on. They're the next big thing.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Nayantara. Thanks for the opportunity. This report has been in the works for the last 1 year. The whole purpose of the ASK Private Wealth Fund India Future Unicorn Index is to really try to speak about the growth, the story of these startups in turning unicorns. Quite often, the stories of startups have been limited to the unicorns and so on. So sometimes we felt that the pre-unicorn phase sometimes neglected. So that's why we've been working on this report and trying to come up with who the future unicorns could be. And of course, the groundwork and the research has been done by us, but then this report has been prepared with opinions from the name brand VCs, and they get their feedback on helping us finalize who the cheetahs and gazelles are. Of course, this is a funding winter, and we haven't fully taken into effect some of the markdowns that has happened in the market. But then, just to give you some perspective, we do a similar report globally, and if I have to look at the Hurun Future Unicorn Index in China, the total number of gazelles and cheetahs in China is about 440. So India is only 122. So there is still a lot more catch up to do. And once the winter is over and we've lot more interest back with the ecosystem into the startups, you could see a lot more numbers adding up.
And Mr. Saluja, if I can come to you, and before we get to the specifics and some of the startups that have been identified by both the organizations, give us a sense of where you're seeing, what kind of interest are you seeing when it comes to private investments? If there are going to be valuation markdowns, if there are going to be startups in distress, if there are going to be, all the gloom and doom that the ecosystem seems to be going through, and also sanity coming back into the ecosystem, are HNIs, are retail, HNIs, ultra HNIs still looking at this space, and how actively?
Yes, thank you for having me on this show. Valuations, of course, have been brought down to more rational levels, and the same goes even with the public markets. It's not just in the private markets, but it is during these times you really get to see what I would say, differentiate the men from the boys. Even in the startup ecosystem, there is still a lot of wonderful companies that are not only growing, but they have the potential to actually impact and transform millions of lives, and we continue to see that. And wherever there is a good startup with a founder with professional and I would say intelligent, I would say integrity to really make the business work and manage the cash well, you are still finding a lot of interest that is coming in both from private equity funds and also ultra HNIs who are willing to invest in such companies. So while surely there's been a markdown, there's a lot of froth that's moved out, but in selective businesses that still have what we call a product market fit, where clearly the product has been accepted and the business is growing aggressively, you're still finding enough and more funds and HNIs willing to back those companies.
Okay. So now you tell us, Mr. Junaid, that what really is the point of this report when you are identifying Giselles, when you identify cheetahs, and let's put it out there, topping the charts for you guys is Shiprocket. So is this what the idea is for those who want to invest in the private markets, those who want to get, a hand in early in the room? These should be some of the startups that they look at if they find an opportunity to enter.
A great question. I think I myself, I'm an active angel investor, and just to add on to what Ms. Saluja said earlier, these are times when investors are looking not just at growth but also looking at margins and all that stuff. The relevance of this report specifically, Ms. Nayantara, is that is to celebrate the stories of some of these companies that are not yet unicorns, and also give an indication as to what are the kind of emerging sectors that could blow out in the next few years. And the report in itself is not limited to just these startups, but also looking at some of the investors who have contributed or made some of these interesting bets now, and the angel investors, the employment, and trying to give a sense to the readers. These are some of the amazing startups that could potentially become unicorns, but also these are some of the interesting things that these startups do in terms of employment numbers and the ESOPs and things like that. So the whole objective is to celebrate these stories of startups that have not yet become unicorns, and we are trying to do these future unicorn decks across the world in various countries, and try and do a benchmarking India versus the rest of the world as well, and try to track these stories right when at the initial stages. So that's the whole the purpose.
Also, just to add, if I may, this index that we created, the ASK Future Unicorn Index, is actually a very good reflection of India's story. If you look at the list, we have entrepreneurs across extremely diverse age groups, the youngest being in the teens, and then you find more and more women are chasing the entrepreneurial dream and really flourishing in their ventures. And then we have big success stories that are coming from cities beyond the metros. And to sum it all up, the importance also of strong fundamentals has come to the core. If you look at this research report, because we have more than 50% of the entrepreneurs that have come from IITs and IIMs. So yes, there have been, as of May 22, there are close to 69,000 startups that India has, and some of them may be facing challenges of markdowns, etc. if there's no clear path to profitability. But there are still very, very good businesses that are really disrupting business models, creating a lot of value, impacting a lot of lives, and are definitely here to stay. And valuations up and down, just like public markets in an emerging country like India, you always have these, phases where liquidity is tight and sometimes, valuations can get affected. But if you have a founder whose focus is not to make a unicorn a destination, but it's just a milestone, and he's looking at a much longer, I would say a path to profitability. Yeah, yes.
Mr. Saluja, I'm going through the index. I'm starting with the Giselles, right? Number 1, Shiprocket. It's backed by Zomato. Number 4, Ather Energy. That's backed by Hero Motorcorp, another listed giant, the world's largest two-wheeler maker. Number 7 is Dunzo, which is trying to pioneer quick commerce. It's backed by Reliance Industries. I'm taking this because, this is the Giselle list. These startups one would have to, it would be very expensive to invest in these startups, and look at the others who are there. These are listed giants, listed corporations.
Right. So expensive or cheap is a function of whether there is a path to profitability or not, or what you see of the business over the next 5-10 years. In the listed space, of course, you have much more information that's available, and you have maybe growth rates that are coming close to maturity, barring some of the companies that have recently got listed. I think there's a much larger bet you are taking in the unlisted space. If you believe that over a period of time, some of these business models will achieve leadership in the segment that they are in, and their current focus is only on just client acquisition at a very, very aggressive space. Some could be actually not necessarily consumer tech models or product oriented companies which have a very strong annuity model. So it's a call that you take on each company to decide whether they are actually highly valued or not. And most private equity funds, barring some who may just be flush with liquidity and not knowing what to do with it, I think most ultra HNIs and private equity funds make a sensible sort of evaluation of the potential of that business while investing. So cheapness or expensiveness is really basis the potential of
availability.
Growth, the availability of.
Mr. Saluja, I also meant availability. It would not be very easy to enter what you have identified to be gazelles, right? Or have I got that wrong? Because these are all in their late stages as well. They're about to turn unicorns. They've been discovered by other, with very large VC firms, all listed companies.
So HNIs, ultra HNIs get an opportunity to invest in this mostly through private equity funds, not necessarily directly. So, they've reached a stage, most of them are either valued at 200 million or 500 million. That's the criteria. And most of these businesses have reached at least some product market fit. They're not really early stage. And hence, an opportunity to invest in them comes in with larger pools of capital, which are typically brought in by private equity funds or family offices. Some larger institutions with much more access to a pool of capital.
Fair point. It's the family offices. They sometimes become the limited partners as well for at least the Indian VC firms. There's another trend, of course, that we have been. We still don't have a proper private exchange unless you join, some of the angel investor groups. And with that, Mr. Junaid, I'd like to come to you. Forget the gloom and doom. We can also talk ourselves into recession, but there was insanity in the ecosystem where there was valuation, the fear of missing out, term sheets that were being signed in a matter of day or two, that FOMO is turning into JOMO, joy of missing out. But having said all of this, can you tell us, Mr. Junaid, how you, the folks at Hurun, how do you all approach startups, the valuation metrics that you see to say that, okay, this one could work?
I think that's a very interesting question. When we were doing the research for the ASK Private Wealth Future Index, one of the fundamental questions that we had was the research started when the market was really going through the roof, right? So that's when the research started. But then most of the vetting of these companies in terms of whether they could turn unicorns and so on, that happened during the last part of the research. This is about 2-3 months back. So that's when we got the feedback from the name brand VCs and angel investors and so on regarding regarding whether these companies are cheetahs or gazelles or cheetahs. And even if you notice in the report, we haven't really put a valuation number there because we still are trying to figure out how the effect of some of these valuations could be. For instance, just to give you some kind of perspective, right? When the stock markets are going up like crazy, right? We do not really apply the same kind of growth in terms of valuation of multiples to private enterprises. We apply some discount to it. So similarly, when the stock markets go down drastically and the markets go down drastically, we cannot really put a direct discount in terms of how the markets have gone down in terms of private companies' valuation. So we are waiting to see how it will all shape up over the next few months. I've in fact mentioned that in the report also. One thing that definitely we would be actively looking at doing to an update of the report would be to look at how the market conditions are, and if needed be, despite the funding round valuations, we might take our own stand in terms of what the valuation could be. and we might even mark down valuations based on what we think the valuation could be in the reports that we put out the next time.
So, Mr. Saluja, with everything that you were also saying, that there is pain in the private markets, is of course also pain in the public markets. Retail investors are looking at zero returns or negligible returns this year in 2022. But Mr. Saluja, the problem also has been the recent IPOs, right? Whether you look at a Zomato or you look at a Policy Bazaar, and we all know the names, Card Trades, etc., etc. That, coupled with what's happening in the startup ecosystem, you're saying that it may not have dented sentiment for HNIs or ultra HNIs, or they're just waiting for a better entry point?
People have become more selective and, of course, waiting for better valuation. So in such moments, whenever you see a slowdown, or let's say foreign portfolio money going out of the country, or liquidity getting tightened, it's the same reaction in public markets and also in the private markets. Private markets, you're waiting for a better deal. You're assuming that next round of funding will be cheaper. But as I mentioned to you, you would have read even in the news today about Lenskart raising another round at $4 billion, and the last round was raised at $2.5 billion. So clearly, wherever the founder has intellectual honesty to recognize where in the cycle they are as a company, if they've achieved core product market fit, where business is growing, client acquisition is happening, and then they're taking the right steps to reduce cash burn and to get default alive. And if the founder has a pulse in the market and he is making the right choices, you're still seeing a lot of money chasing him. So people have become more selective. They are also assuming that some of these businesses, if they show a slowdown in growth, they may get better value, but that's to be seen. At least at the moment in India, retail level slowdown hasn't really come into fore. You look at online garment sales, you look at online, lots of retail business continues to remain extremely strong, including real estate. So it's just that people have become selective, and that typically happens, during a downturn where people get a little risk averse and try and just get the best deal, if nothing else.
The other thing, Mr. Junaid, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is my observation after going through the list. If I see the cheetahs that need to run faster to become unicorns, to be minted into unicorns, and maybe one day decacorns, there it's more diverse when we look at the sectors. You've got ranging sectors from e-commerce to fintech to cloud kitchens to logistics, edtech. There's a lot there. But when I look at the list of the gazelles, which need less time to be minted into unicorns, they're further on, it stands out that most of them are primarily in e-commerce or fintech. Are these the winners when it comes to the Indian startup ecosystem?
It's mainly, so I'll tell you the process of compiling the list. It's basically based on the funding rounds, based on which we compile the initial setup list, and we write to the funds and investors, the network, to give feedback on the final names of gazelles and cheetahs. So that's how it is done. So we have absolutely no control in terms of analyzing which sector could go up and go down. It's basically kind of a research plus a collaboration standpoint. Now, again, to answer your question, see, India startup unicorns, the so-called unicorn story started possibly, it's very young, compared to a market like China. So some of the obvious sectors that would initially gain traction, create value, would be the ones that you mentioned, which will be fintech, e-commerce. That's when that's a direct correlation to more and more people coming to internet, rising income levels. When all that factor multiply, all these sectors would go up. But when you come to cheetahs, that's when you see a lot more interesting breakout sectors. For example, we have an aerospace cheetah. We have a green tech company which could possibly become a unicorn in 4 or 5 years. So there are quite a few interesting sectors that have popped up. I think that's the kind of indication of the companies like that, or the sectors that some of the small angel investors like me who should possibly look at investing in. We might not get allocation in Dunzo and so on, but if I have to start small at some startups, and these are kind of sectors in Cheetah that I should possibly look at while investing in. So that's the whole. I hope it gives you the perspective.
So just to add, I think one of the reasons fintech sector is major representation in this list. It's a lot to do with the rails or the infrastructure that the government has created over the last 5-6 years, which has helped with the adoption of digital currency. Whether you take UPI for payments or UID for KYC, they've been game changers. And this adoption has led to immense growth in users and hence corresponding valuation. So that's one of the reasons I think government has played a very, very big role to create the whole infrastructure within which fintech has really boomed.
As we wind down this conversation, and the list, by the way, of the gazelles and cheetahs has been on our screens for all of our viewers to read, so they're watching this interview more for insights about what's happening. So Mr. Saluja, as HNIs, ultra HNIs, those who want to have their foot in the door when it comes to private sector investments, as they get selective, are they willing to take less risk, at least with smaller checks? Has that happened? Also because I would imagine valuations have come down, funding rounds have become smaller.
See, in the last 6 months, we've raised 3 funds. One early stage, one which is Series B and C, and one which is late stage. The one that has got the maximum response is the Series B and C. So clearly earlier you used to get much more interest in early stage. Late stage, had become expensive, so people are sort of waiting to see whether there is any correction. But B and C stage, where the product is established, business model is established, unit cost economics are in place, and of course you're backing the right entrepreneur, we saw the maximum fundraising sort of happening there. So if this entire ecosystem that has started being built up over the last 8-10 years, we believe that this is going to continue. We feel that next 10, 15, 20 years is all about looking east, and India will be a major contributor to global innovation. Whether you look at SaaS, you look at artificial intelligence, you look at machine learning, lead innovations, or even consumer products and services, we will be a hub for global innovation, and you will continue to see very good interest. But as I mentioned earlier, whenever economy goes through a little bit of a small downturn, or when interest rates go up, people start, it's very common in a rising interest rate scenario. Not only do public listed, but even private companies get valued downwards because of the way we value companies on future cash flows. You discount future cash flows and arrive at what is the current valuation. So whenever interest rates go up, the discount rate goes up and automatically valuations get adjusted. Same thing has happened even with the listed companies. The big names, the Googles and the Microsoft and Apples of the world, you've seen corrections of 30-40%. NASDAQ stocks have corrected 50%. So it's not a trend only with unlisted. It's just a scenario of tighter liquidity that is creating and making people more careful about what they invest. Similarly, even businesses, when they look at expanding or growth during these times, they also just slow down a little bit on their expansion plans, tighten their cost, improve their productivity. And the same thing will happen in the unlisted space. And I feel some of the good businesses come out even more stronger after having, seen this likely challenge that will be there for the next 12 to 15 months.
Just to add one more perspective here is that what I've seen is some of these next gen entrepreneurs and the billionaire families and all, I've been having some interesting conversations where they're allocating smaller checks towards seed stage startups, really small check, but just to understand the asset class at that risk level. Of course, they're making all these big investments through private equity funds and through SK Private Wealth and so on, but then some of them are making individual investments through really early stage pre-seed startups for smaller checks. So that's something that I've seen firsthand.
Okay, so there is beyond the headlines what we read about. Money is continuing to be raised, as we just heard from ASK. Money is continuing to be deployed, but more in the Series B and Series C, the later stage funding. So let's see how all of this pans out. You have a list of the cheetahs and gazelles that we've been bringing to you. A list has been put together by Hurun as well as ASK. The list of the next bunch of startups that you need to watch out for. The next big thing, as we like to call it here on ET Now. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.